welcome to Ministries That Podcast, where I talk to successful ministry leaders about how they're using podcasting to amplify their mission and grow their ministry so you can too. I'm Tim Hall, your host and owner of Sonomorphic, a podcast production company that specializes in podcasting for ministries. My guest today is J.R. Briggs. In addition to being a podcast host, he has 4 passions: following Jesus, equipping and investing in hungry kingdom leaders, growing fruit on other people's trees, and creating good kingdom mischief. In short, his calling is to partner with people who are called to follow Jesus while they lead others. In 2011, he started Kairos Partnerships, an organization committed to help leaders overcome their unique leadership challenges through leadership coaching, consulting, speaking, and writing. We're going to talk about why he started his podcast in the height of COVID, why asking better questions is so important, and how he prepares for his weekly solo teaching episodes. So let's get right to it. Here's my conversation with J.R. Briggs. Well, J.R., thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Tim. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, so you started the Resilient Leaders podcast with J.R. Briggs back in April of 2020, where you've published over 320 episodes at this point, and the description for the podcast reads, "The Resilient Leaders podcast offers a variety of topics, perspectives, questions, and tools to help leaders navigate the new reality. In each episode, J.R. Briggs addresses pressing issues and other practical next steps on how to lead with resilience. Lean in, learn, and explore what it means to be resilient, because leadership is irreplaceable in the new reality." And that new reality, we just mentioned 2020 is coming out of that, and the leadership changes and so many life changes of so many in that time. And then on your website, it says about you that he works to seek to bridge the gap between spiritual formation and actionable leadership practices, aiming to help faith leaders and their organizations grow both in their faith and in their impact on their communities. So I'm so glad to have you on the show today, JR, to hear about your podcasting journey. And to start off, let's look back a little bit. You've been podcasting now for about 5 years. How has having a podcast helped you amplify your mission and grow your ministry?
Yeah, great question on this, Tim. And I love this topic, by the way. So thank you for having a podcast on podcasting. The intent of starting it was I'm always trying to add value to every single leader who is across from me, whether it's a Zoom room digitally or we're sitting in the same room. And so I thought, what are some ways I could extend value to other people? So I'm not trying to have millions of downloads, although that's wonderful if it happens. I'm simply wanting to hear stories of people saying that added value to me in my personal life, that added value to our team. I'm thinking about leadership in a new way. I thought about quitting. And so how has that amplified the mission? Well, our mission is we just want to partner with hungry kingdom leaders and help grow fruit on other people's trees. And one of the ways it extends the reach of that, of growing fruit on other people's trees, is the opportunity to, as people are washing dishes or going on a run or stuck in traffic, that's how I grow. And because I've been listening to podcasts, and that's how I redeem my commute times and on the treadmill or folding laundry, I thought, what would it look like for us to be able to do that as an organization for others?
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your ministry, Kairos Partnerships, that you started back in 2011. Tell us a little bit about the ministry and then why it made sense to create a podcast for the ministry.
Yeah. So I was a leader myself who felt lonely, ill-equipped, and overwhelmed. And I didn't know where to go. And I knew it was important for me to grow. I wanted a mentor. I wanted friends who I could really talk about these things, look for equipping, have people hold me accountable, people encourage me. And I couldn't find it. It was a very lonely season. And I remember there was a time I was really complaining to the Lord, actually, and saying, why can't, I find support? And I began to hear of other leaders who were feeling the same thing. And there was a point, a nexus of realizing I've got something to share, but I also have a deep sensitivity to how lonely leadership can be. And so I thought, what would it look like to actually join with God to make sure leaders don't feel what I felt? And so we created Kairos Partnerships. Kairos doesn't matter to us. In fact, we won't correct anybody on that, but we say Kairos. And a lot of people say that's marketing 101 failure. You don't name an organization after a hard to pronounce Greek word. And but it was such an important word because kairos is one of the two words for time in Greek, chronos, where we get 3:45 on a Tuesday afternoon. But kairos were these moments that happened that were pregnant with possibility, where God was trying to break in further. Kairos moments make us bitter or better, but they never leave us the same. And one of the things I began to notice, when people don't steward a kairos moment well, it hurts them. But when a leader doesn't steward a kairos moment, it hurts everybody.
Yeah.
That's the bad news. The good news is that when a leader stewards a kairos moment well, everybody wins. And so we thought, what would it look like for us to partner with leaders who are experiencing kairos moments? These moments that'll make us bitter or better, but won't leave us the same. What if we partnered with them to help them steward faithfully that kairos moment well so that everyone could win? And could we keep them from making really dumb decisions in these kairos moments and keep a lot of shrapnel that could be embedded in people's hearts for years on end? So that's how we started Kairos Partnerships, and started with coaching and then consulting. We have people on our team that offer spiritual direction. We like to say we do everything except counseling. We believe in counseling. We recommend people. I'm involved in counseling. I think every leader should have some sort of counseling. But just for insurance, legality, paperwork, we don't offer that, but we refer elsewhere. We just want leaders to be healthy, because the world needs more healthy leaders.
Yeah.
And healthier leaders. And so that's where we started the organization. And so we're just looking for any opportunities we can do that. Speaking, writing, coaching, encouragement, newsletter, podcast, any way that we can encourage leaders so they feel less lonely, more equipped, and more faithful to do exactly what they've been called to do.
Nice. Yeah. What's a good example of a Kairos moment that you've seen leaders frequently come up against or find themselves in?
Yeah, in the last 72 hours, I'm just going to think through some of the coaching topics. One is experiencing immense growth at his church of about 1,500, is saying, we just built this new auditorium and now we're maxed out. Do we add another service? Do we plant? Do we just send people away and say, go worship elsewhere? That's a Kairos moment for that church of knowing, how do we steward this growth that we're experiencing? It could be another gentleman was experiencing immense betrayal because a person on his team who he helped plant the church with 17 years ago just stabbed him in the back and left. And he's struggling to have a soft heart. He doesn't want to grow angry or bitter or cynical. And so for him, it's very personal. There's another leader who has been working as a VP of a Christian college, but he's been invited to become the head of school of a K through 12 Christian school in his community. And so he's just thinking through, how do I know what God would want for me? What is God's purposes for my life? I want to do this well for my family, for myself, for the institution I'm a part of, and maybe the new one. Those are just a few just in the past 72 hours. Yeah. And we have capital K Kairos moments. It could be a cancer diagnosis or a death or a betrayal or a major job transition. Or it could be a lower K one of just going, how do I handle stress? I have 17 priorities. How do I narrow it down to one or two? There are all sorts of Kairos moments we have that happen every week for us. And they happen to all of us, leaders or not. But when leaders, like I said, when leaders handle it well, everybody wins. And when they don't, everybody suffers.
Gotcha. So you started doing this work back in 2011 when you started the ministry, and then you started the podcast then in 2020. So tell me about what kind of started attracting you to podcasting. What made it make sense to, okay, let's start a podcast now, as you're probably going into end of 2019, in beginning of 2020. What did that look like? What were those conversations like?
Yeah, you may laugh a little bit, and it may sound a little bit selfish, but I am a teacher at heart, and I love teaching and speaking. And I do that a lot, and I travel a lot, and I'm very grateful for that opportunity. And then, as we know, all of a sudden, that went away. I mean, it was just by the day, everything was being canceled. And I get it. But I'm going, I have so much I'm learning that I want to share, and that I was planning on sharing with others. And so to not have a space to teach, to share, to add value to others, I just felt like something was withering in me. And so I said, where could be a good outlet where I do that? And I think it was in COVID, I think also, where I started my weekly newsletter called 5 Things in 5 Minutes. And I just created this simple, free newsletter to anybody who's interested, a thought, a link, a recommendation, a quote, and a question. That was it. You could read the whole
Nice.
thing in 5 minutes. And I just needed outlets of what I was learning, reading, thinking through to have outlets to share. And because the incarnational ones evaporated, I thought, ooh, can we create some digital ones that might help others? So even if no one listened, Tim, it still was an immense gift for me to just be able to take all these thoughts as the world is in chaos and what's happening, all this uncertainty, and think, how can I think clearly about what's actually happening? Then after COVID kind of slowed down, I said, there's enough of an audience here. And I hear back and I hear stories from people. It was actually twice a week. It was Tuesdays and Fridays.
Yeah.
And then we just pulled back on that a few years in and said, let's just do Tuesday mornings or Wednesday mornings. And so, so it's been some shifts and I'm really grateful we do that. But it really was an outlet for me to start. But it has reinforced the kind of coaching and consulting work that we do. Sometimes someone will say, hey, do you have a resource on this? Or I'm wrestling with this. Can you point me anywhere? And I'll say, actually, episode 86, we actually talked about that. Why don't you listen to that prior to our coaching call on, next week? And that might give us a running start to our time together. So it also becomes an archive resource library to others around particular topics.
Gotcha. So did it kind of come about because those speaking engagements went away that you're just like, I got to get this out? So you literally went from probably sometime in February, things are getting canceled, to how can we get this out? And then you launched in April. Is that kind of how that timeline went?
Yes. Yeah. A good friend of mine, Joel Imbowen. Joel has been the producer of all of our episodes, and his desk is 30 feet from mine right now. And so we're at the same church and same neighborhood. And so I just said, Joel, can you help me with this? And, I can provide the content. I don't know anything about the production side of things, show notes. I don't even know which mic to get, just whatever. Just, can you help me? And he said, yeah. So that was a great partnership to be able to do that. So a lot of it was the content I was going to share at these events I'd already done.
Sure.
So I thought I'll share those. But this idea of resilience, and I think some people are sick of that word because we seem to hear that all the time. COVID or not, though, resilience is still absolutely required for leaders. And so while we may have overused it during COVID, I hope we don't underutilize it either, because it's still there, even though things are quote unquote back to normal, whatever normal is. So it allowed a space for me to think through how can we move forward healthily when we have no idea what tomorrow will look like? People are coming to leaders. What am I supposed to do in COVID? Like, do I have a job? Like, are we going to survive? And leaders were freaking out. And I thought, this might be a good way of not just equipping them with information, but helping them calm down, me included. It was a bit of a anxiety reliever for me just to be able to put this out into the world as well.
Nice. Yeah. So I listened to the trailer and I heard that you chose from the very beginning that frequency of a few times a week, which then got reduced to once a week, as you mentioned, but having the solo teaching format, about 10 minutes long. And then you kind of termed that in what you were going to be doing in episode 1 is truth concentrate. So why has that frequency and format been the best fit for you?
Yeah, great question. What we're finding, and you probably know this more than I do, but long form and short form are growing. And that middle form of 45 minutes to 50 minutes, it's a bit of a watershed. And that isn't the case for me. I listen to all lengths, but I know the trends are kind of pushing toward the two extremes on that. And I mean, I just don't have time to sit down and listen to an hour and 45 minute, I may listen to that in the car and it'd take me 2 weeks, as I'm driving around. But I just thought, there's a lot of fluff. I'm also an author. And so there are a lot of times I read a book and I go, that 200-page book could have been probably 80 pages. And so I thought, what would it look like for me to reduce down and try to force myself? It's not a hard and fast rule, Tim, but I try to keep it at 12 minutes or less. And I listen to every podcast at 1.5 speed. And so that's about 10 minutes. So if people want more, they often ask, or I could break it up and do a 3-part series. And so for me, I just thought, and there are so many people that say, I have about a 10-minute commute to work. So it's really great, Wednesday mornings to get up and in my car, and by the time I pull into work, I can listen to a whole episode. And so that's the goal. Leaders are busy, but you can add value in a short amount of time. The 5 Things in 5 Minutes newsletter forces me to cut the fluff and to get straight to the point. The 12-minute constraint I put on myself with the podcast forces me to cut the fluff and to get straight to the point. Sometimes they're 6 minutes, 7 minutes. They don't have to be long. But I don't want to have to make stuff up and draw it out because I don't think that's fair to the leader and their time. So it's also forcing me. That's why I like the original Twitter where you only had 180 characters or 260 or whatever it was, because what can I say that's impactful and truthful and helpful in this amount of time? And I think the parameters have really forced me to sharpen the tip of the arrow to be clearer. And hopefully that's honoring people's times by cutting the fluff.
Yeah, for sure. So tell me a little bit about that process then. You're talking about the writing things for the podcast, you're writing the newsletter. How do those at all intertwine? And then how are you able to cut the fluff so that you're hitting what you're wanting to hit?
Yeah, great question. So just specifically on the newsletter, I try to force myself to 350 words or less because that's about 5 minutes. And there's links in there that people can follow.
Sure,
so, it's not a hard and fast 5 minutes. So to me, I put that parameter of 350. I also know it's about, the way I do my notes, it's about 2.5 pages where I write out the podcast script.
Okay.
And so if I can keep that to 2.5 or less, sometimes it's 3, but again, if it's between 8 and 12 minutes, I can give myself a bit of a buffer of a half a page to a page on my notes. And so again, that just forces me to do that. Sometimes I've got a great thought and I don't think that's 12 minutes worth of content. I think that would be a great thought for 5 Things in 5 Minutes. Sometimes there's a great thought for 5 Things in 5 minutes that I say, you know what? I don't think I can squeeze that to 350 words. I think I need to kind of make that a little bit longer form, at least to me, on that. And so sometimes they interplay, or I will do a podcast episode on a particular topic, and then I might put that as a link or a recommendation in the next few weeks in the newsletter. So I try to see if there's some cross-pollination that can exist as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So let's talk about your work as an author as well. We're talking about writing here for the podcast, the newsletter, but you're also writing books, and your latest book is The Art of Asking Better Questions. So in that book, you explore why asking better questions is so important and why we don't ask them very much. So tell us a little bit about the book and then the result of ministry leaders asking better questions on their podcasts, as well as in their life and their ministries.
Yeah, very simply, the whole book can be summed up in one sentence: that the quality of your life will be determined by the quality of the questions you ask God, yourself, and others. I could even go so far as to say the quality of a podcast will be determined by the quality of the questions we ask God, ourselves, and others, and especially others. And we know that when someone asks a generic question, we often get a generic answer. How was your day? Good. Hey, what are you up to today? Not much. But if I can raise the quality of my questions and they can be thoughtful and intentional, what was the most interesting part of your weekend? Or you went on vacation. What's one snapshot that you can describe to me that was most meaningful from your time when you went to Jamaica? That's going to lead to great conversation. So it's a bit of a universal principle. The better, more thoughtful, more engaging the question, the better, more thoughtful, engaging the conversation. It's as predictable as a communist election. I mean, really, when you do that well, it's amazing the kind of conversations that you have. And Tim, you're a good question asker. You've come prepared, and that's been helpful for me. And hopefully that's led to your listeners believing that not just this episode, but all of them are better because of the questions that you bring. And so we want to avoid lazy questions in all areas of our lives. But I want to encourage your listeners, especially those who are podcasters, to think about the questions they ask, and then to go through and say, if I were to improve each of these questions by just 10 or 15%, how might I do it? So that's the first one. The second one is follow-up questions are gold. And so sometimes you script questions out as a podcaster, and they're good, but then someone mentions something that sounds really interesting, or I don't know, they have 5 pet boa constrictors, and you're like, what? And you're like, whoa. Can we double click on that? Like, tell me, when did you first get interested in boa constrictors? right?
Yeah.
What is that like to have those around the house? What are some common reactions that people have when they hear that you have 5 boa constrictors? And then all of a sudden you're learning something that you never would have learned simply because of a follow-up question you never anticipated when you were prepping for the conversation.
What are some tips that you would have? You're talking about refining question, you write the questions out and then tweaking them to be a little bit better, a little bit more intentional. What's a good way that you found to make those changes, and what makes a good question then with those tweaks?
Yeah. I try to ask questions about my questions, not to get too meta here, but as I'm sitting down, I'm thinking a couple things. What's my motive? Number one, I think that's really important. Is it for more information? Is it because I'm interested? Is it because I want to learn? I want to value them? Sometimes, as we know, there are gotcha questions that, reporters or whatever, they're often trying to just get people to admit something or to spill the beans on something. And so what's my motive, number one? Number two, like I said, list the questions and then say, okay, if I can sharpen the tip of that arrow, what would it be? Number two. Number three would be, what value can I add to them? How can I honor them with the questions? And how could I also honor my listeners? What is it my listeners are going through? What problems are they facing? Where are they feeling stuck? What itch do they desire to have scratched? What hope do they need? What are their hopes and fears and dreams? And can I help I'm always trying to think, can I ask a question that, and let's just assume that every guest has been interviewed by 100 other podcasters. Can I ask a question? They go, no one has ever asked me that question before. That is a beautiful gift you can give people because, as you know, especially if someone's been on multiple podcasts, they're often asked the same questions, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But to give them a gift to say, wow, I love when I've interviewed other people, and then later, off the air or off the stage, they pull me aside and say, thank you. You asked me questions I've never been asked before, which is why one fun question I always like to ask is, what's a question you've never been asked on a podcast before that you've always wished you would be? It's fascinating what comes out. So anyway, those would be a few things that I would, last one would be questions are a form of hospitality. And if we can think of question asking as hospitality, it can really be an invitation to help people feel welcome and valued. But also we get hospital from the word hospitality. So it can also be healing. So there are times where, I used to host a podcast called the Monday Morning Pastors podcast. And it was co-hosted with my friend Doug. Doug and I were pastors, and we realized that most pastors quit on a Monday. Depression for pastors spikes on Mondays. Suicide attempts of pastors happen a significant amount on Mondays. Pastors quit most on Mondays. And so we said, what does it look like for us to encourage pastors on Mondays with really raw but hopeful stories? So it wasn't a Hallmark card. And it wasn't just raw and then make them cynical and, okay, I guess I'm going to quit even more so now because I listen to the podcast. I say all this because that's where I did a lot of interviewing with Doug of various pastors. Where have you been hurt? What have you learned? How do you have a soft heart? And when were you tempted to have a hardened heart? How did you not get cynical? Why are you still in it after 35 years with so many lacerations on your soul? What keeps you in it? What lies are you tempted to believe when you failed or you feel like a failure? And people began to tear up and cry and later would say, thank you for those. Those were gifts. I had no idea what answer was going to come out in our time together. I even remember we had Malcolm Geit, a wonderful poet from England. And as we were interviewing him, we asked him to read one of his poems. This has never happened to me, Tim. Right in the middle of it, I just began to weep live on air. And it startled Malcolm Geit. And I just kind of pointed on the screen to Doug, like, Doug, take over for me. But it so moved me And I don't think we would have gotten there had Doug and I not asked certain questions, but also Malcolm asked us questions too. And so it was a beautiful mix together of, I had no idea I needed some healing in some ways that his poetry moved me, but I'm really grateful a question prompted that opportunity among us. So it can be a form of hospitality, not just for others, but even for us as the hosts.
Yeah, that's great. That's great perspective. As we take this idea of asking better questions into our personal life, like it's easy for me to sit down and put these questions on a page to ask in a podcast interview. But to build deeper relationships with the people around me, it's a different thing, right? Basically, what I'm trying to get to is how do you ask better questions in your everyday life when you're not preparing for those conversations, so to speak? You know, just the conversations that come up. I mean, you were just listing off a bunch as you were answering that question of like digging deeper when you were doing the Monday Pastor podcast. Are those just questions that you've kind of rehearsed to yourself, or like what does that look like?
Yeah, it's great question, Tim. In fact, the last third of the book is just trying to be ridiculously practical in giving all sorts of tools of what you can do before you have a conversation, in the middle of a conversation, and then afterwards reflecting on the conversation for you to assess your own self and think about how you can improve in the future. So I won't list all of those because there are many, but the first one is just to be aware. I think it's amazing how many times we're just unaware of the questions we have been asked and the questions we ask others. Even just to say, today, what was the best question I asked? Just, before I go to bed or I'm brushing my teeth, like what were some of the best questions I asked? Or could I have asked some questions in some conversations that I didn't? And then you can you talk about you don't want to sit down and prepare and write everything out. But before I log into a Zoom meeting, or if I'm driving 5 or 10 minutes in the car to meet someone for Starbucks or whatever it might be, I'm thinking through, okay, I'm meeting with Greg. What would be 1 or 2 questions I could ask Greg? Oh, Greg just got back from his honeymoon. Just say like, hey, how are you guys doing? Just newly married. What is that like? What are you experiencing? What's surprising you? But also going, oh, Greg's also engaged in this activity over here that he's excited about, but it's been challenging. And to say, oh, wow. So is the excitement outweighing the challenge? And what happens when it switches? Is it still worth it? So that took me, 30 seconds? And I just made that up. But I think if you can just think on your way over, what are 2 questions I could ask?
Yeah.
Or I'm driving home on my way home from work, and before I walk in the door of thinking, what are 2 questions I could ask my wife? Or my son, is playing basketball on his high school basketball team. Is there a question I could ask him about what he's learning about from his teammates or from his coach? Or how different would he be if he didn't play basketball? Or what is he really proud of this year that maybe he hasn't voiced yet? And so if I can just be a little bit more intentional in that, awareness, thinking ahead, planning ahead. I think too is talking percentages. If you think about a conversation, what are the percentages of me talking versus me listening? Them asking questions, me asking them questions. Where was that? And I always encourage people to try to shoot for 40% talking, 60% listening. You don't want it to be in a normal conversation, 5% talking or listening, and they're talking 95% of the time, or vice versa. We want to play pickleball, conversational pickleball back and forth. And oftentimes what gets the ball back over the pickleball net is simply by asking a question. Even if we just say, thank you for asking, what about you? How would you answer that question?
Yeah.
And just that simple question, Tim, of what about you? People ask us a question, we talk, the conversation dies. The simplest thing we can do, just hit the ball back over the net. What about you? How about you? Just some very simple things we can do in everyday conversation.
Nice. As you were talking about that, it seemed like a lot of the way in which you can ask better questions is, one, being less distracted, because you're having these in-between moments that you're actually thinking about what's coming next and not distracting yourself in the downtime or the bored minutes between whatever it is from one thing to the next. And just, being more intentional about going into conversations as opposed to just purely showing up, but putting some more thought into it, not being distracted in those in-between moments, and thinking through how can I serve this person by asking them these questions, and how can it in turn build that relationship, right?
That's exactly right. And we can give all the tips and tools and tricks about how to ask better questions, but it's going to feel fake or fall flat if we don't have genuine curiosity.
Yeah, yeah.
If people just don't genuinely care to know what other people are thinking, people are going to feel that pretty quick. People's meters are pretty sharp. And so in the book, I talk about the 4 essentials to asking great questions. You've got to have curiosity, you've got to have wisdom, you've got to have humility, and you've got to have courage. Of course, you have to have curiosity. Why else would you ask? There needs to be wisdom because there are 5,000 questions you could ask. How would we know what's the right question to ask at the right time to the right person for the right reason? There's a lot of wisdom that's needed. I have to have humility because if I'm asking a question, Tim, it's admitting I don't know the answer. And that takes a lot of humility. People don't want to look stupid or unintelligent. And so I have to admit I don't know. And then courage, because sometimes when we admit we don't know, people go, "What? How can you not know that?" And so we have to put ourselves out there a bit to ask questions. Questions are a form of appropriate vulnerability. And to risk vulnerability always requires courage. And so if those 4 building blocks are there, then you can teach people how to ask better questions. But if people just say, "Just give me the tips, give me the life hacks," it doesn't work.
Yeah, yeah. That's good. All right, I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and talk a little bit more of the behind the scenes stuff. First of which is I noticed going back and listening to the trailer, the first episode, that your audio quality has been consistent throughout. It sounded great. So I'd love to know what tools that you use with your producer as well to make your sound consistent and high quality from day one.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. And the credit goes to, as I mentioned, my producer, Joel, who runs a video and podcast production company. So that helps tremendously to have that, and I'm really grateful. He just handed me this mic and said, plug it in and screw it to the corner of your desk. So I literally just use whatever he's given to me. And we use Squadcast. And we thought about Riverside, and Riverside's great, and others. We just had enough success with Squadcast of some other interviews that I had been invited to join, and we thought, let's just do that. And so Joel's done a great job of just saying, plug and play, and that's I'm really grateful for that, because if this was just me, Tim, I probably would have put this to bed after about 20 episodes. So I'm really grateful for Joel, and I'll make sure to tell him you said that, because he does a great job mixing and the sound quality on that. I try to make it as simple as possible for him. I try to do it in one take. I don't need it to be perfect and polished. I want it to be thoughtful and professional. But some have even said, JR, sometimes when you have ums or you catch yourself, beg your pardon, and you said it incorrectly, JR, like that actually shows the humanness, and it feels a little bit more conversational, like a podcast, and less like a presentation behind a lectern. And so I try to do one take, and Joel, I send it to him with the show notes, nice and simple, real short. And he sends it up to the Ethernet, sprinkles this little magic pixie dust on it, and boom, shows up on my Apple podcast app on Wednesday morning at 7.
Love it. Yeah. And as I'm looking at you, as we're having this conversation on Riverside, and I can see your video and see your mic, the microphone that you're using is the ATR, probably a 2100. Probably been using that since the beginning, if I would venture to guess. And it's a great mic if you're getting started in podcasting. It sounds great. You just got a pop filter sitting on top there. Frequently mics like this that you just plug in it's a cheaper mic. It's like $60. It's a great quality mic, but it has issues with plosives. You throw a pop filter on there, helps with all of that stuff. And man, it's amazing what just a little thoughtfulness and putting that all together can produce on the back end. So as we're coming to a close on our conversation, I'd love to know, what are you most excited about for the future of your ministry and the Resilient Leaders podcast?
Yeah, thanks for asking. When it comes to Kairos partnerships, we have stressed Kairos, that we've majored in Kairos and minored in partnerships, of really trying to build a culture and a really clear, compelling why as to why we do this. And the partnerships have been there. It's been great. that was the first decade or so. Now we're really trying to major in the partnerships and minor in Kairos. Doesn't mean we don't care about it, but because of the culture and the vision we really feel is very clear, and people get that, of really trying to expand of what partnerships could we create moving forward that 1 + 1 = 7. And so that's been wonderful working with many different individuals, but also with organizations and ministries and denominations. And we're really grateful. It was just pastors, and now we get a chance to coach several Christian college presidents and Division I men's basketball coaches, a bunch of Chick-fil-A operators, entrepreneurs, Black Hawk helicopter operators in the military. I mean, there's just a wide range of leaders from various sectors. And so creating more partnerships so leaders don't feel ill-equipped or unhealthy or lonely and stuck. And so that's the goal. With that, we have a team of people. It's not just me. So we've got a team of coaches around the country, and we're really grateful. So the goal this year is for me to step out from being I'm not leaving, I'm not going anywhere, but of trying to be less of the hub of the wheel and have the mission be the hub, and I just be one of the spokes with everybody else on our team. That's the goal. So we have an operations director, and Katie has done a great job of helping create some of those partnerships, but also having me take a step back while everyone else on our team takes a few steps forward. So that's what's really exciting. Resilient Leaders Podcast, I'm not sure. I just want to continue to create value. And if we stop adding value, or other people say, hey, that was great, I'm not sure it's adding value anymore, I have no problem laying it down. I can lay down the bike at any time. It's a lot of work, but I do it because I continue to hear stories. But if I become convinced that it's just adding to the noise, I know there's a lot of podcasts, and so always asking, are we oversaturating the market? Am I adding more noise, or am I adding more value? And if the answer is always adding more value, I'll continue. And if I'm not sure, then I will go into an evaluative phase with my team to say, how would we know? But so far, we're full speed ahead, and we're going to keep doing all we can to add value to leaders who need it.
That's great. All right, well, now we're going to jump into this new segment. I've been doing this segment called the High Pass segment, and we've since changed it for this season to the EQ segment, just some nice audio pun type deal here, where we talk about what's getting cut and what's getting boosted. So I'm interested to know, what's something that you're trying to cut out of your life right now?
This is a question I love asking other leaders, so this is good. Thank you for asking me on this. We talk a lot about the importance of to-do lists, but more importantly, to-don't lists. Leaders, it's easy for us to put to-do lists together, but what is it? What's on our to-don't list? And so for me, I'm really trying to, I'm very disciplined and have a rule of life and rhythms, but one of them, as silly as it sounds, is I'm trying to cut out eating after 8 p.m. Because I have realized that any of the eating I do after 8 p.m. is not healthy and is usually unnecessary. I'm doing it just because I probably should just go grab a bowl of ice cream or a bowl of cereal or some chips and salsa or whatever. And those are bad things, but I'm really trying to be disciplined on the last few hours of my day before going to bed on the things that I may not necessarily need. So that's number one.
That's great.
We have a social media guy, and he does a great job with it, but even just trying to maybe not cut out, but turn down my social media intake. I don't have anything on my phone. That was a really good thing to cut off my phone. And I have no notifications other than texts on my phone, and that's really important for me. So I've been trimming and cutting, but still on my desktop, it would be good to just trim down some social media usage even more.
Gotcha. Yeah. So what's a practice that you're trying to boost or focus your time and energy on right now?
Well, there are several. As silly as it sounds, I have gotten in the habit of 10 minutes every morning for the last year of stretching. I have never been able to touch my toes ever in my whole life until the last 6 months. And it's been a wonderful thing to just get down and do 10 minutes of stretching and 25 push-ups. So stretching my legs, stretching my back, stretching my arms, and just getting down and doing 25 push-ups. And it's probably, if I knew how good I would feel, now I'm 46, and some of your listeners are like, that's what old people do. Honestly, I probably, looking back, I wish I had started this like in my 20s or 30s because of how well I feel throughout the day. And I have a sedentary job, and I work out 3 days a week, but just that stretching component every day to build that in has been an unbelievably invaluable practice to boost my focus and time and energy.
Yeah. What are the stretches that you're doing? I'm curious.
Yeah, it's hard to describe.
Sure.
I could just do it right now if you want. I can stand up now. But a lot of it's leg work.
Okay.
Toes, the butterfly stretch of stretching out my groin. I do a leg stretch where I stretch my legs out under the couch, where I put my knee on the couch. It's just called the couch stretch that I heard on a podcast, actually, where a world-class stretching coach who has helped some of the best athletes in the world and like 5 of the last 6 presidents of the United States in their stretching. It was so fascinating. I thought, I'm going to try the stretching thing. And so the couch stretch is one that he invented and it's been really helpful. So one is, just getting on all fours and stretching my back out in the morning.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't take long. But then first I started with just 5 push-ups and I was like, you know what? I'm going to just push myself a little bit more than 5. And then I did 10, and I just feel like 25 is just it just gets the heart pumping a little bit more before I get up off the floor. But I know it sounds silly. People are like, really? I got this guy on and we're talking stretching? But it really has been a game changer for me. I wish I did it earlier.
Yeah. That's something I feel like I need to do because I have a sedentary job, just sitting at the computer doing a lot of podcast editing and whatnot. And it's like, I can definitely tell when I haven't been up and walking around for a while. It's like, I feel like I should do something. So that's a good encouragement through what you're doing. All right. Well, what's one of your favorite stories from a listener about how the Resilient Leaders podcast has impacted their life?
I don't know. I have a favorite story. The one that came to mind immediately was one that actually I got a call from yesterday. And it's a friend of mine, and he lives in the area. He runs a specialty nut butter company.
Okay.
And it is continuing to expand like crazy regionally and hoping to go national with that soon. And he just realized on a most recent episode, he just said, wow, it was called Leadership as Poetry and Plumbing. And he just said, that was so freeing for me because he said, I'm a plumber and we're having to go through all of this, certification of safety and this and that. And he said, I'm just so overwhelmed. Like, I don't know how to do all this stuff. I want to inspire our team. And he said it was so good for the language because it really helped me realize that my 2 other partners, they are plumbers and they love all the details and they want to work with the consultant, the safety consultant on all the food. And he said, I know it's important, but it stresses me out or I glaze over when the details come out. And he sent the episode to the rest of his team and said, can you all listen to this? I think this is what I've been feeling, but have never been able to articulate this out loud. And so they were able to say, yeah, you're right. Like, I am a plumber and you're a poet. And so why don't you just be the poet on these things and let's take the plumbing things from you because that's what we're good at. And so it just became, I just love that story, how it became not just for him, but he sent it out as common language to be able to talk with his team about moving forward on a very important piece, which he said could actually blow the roof off of opportunities if they get this certification.
Yeah.
And so he says, I know it's important. I just get locked up because I'm terrible at that side of things. So it was freeing for him because, you can feel a little overwhelmed. Like, why can't I be this kind of leader?
Sure.
And he just realized, I'm not. And that's okay. But I work with others who are. So let's think about how do we shift some responsibility. So I love that story. Yeah. It was just yesterday, so it's fresh on my mind. But that's why we do the podcast, for stories of adding value like that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, JR, as we close, who else do you know that would be a great fit for this podcast?
I mentioned him before, but he doesn't host a podcast, but I mentioned Joel. And I think if you haven't had producers on before, it might be interesting because some of the things you were talking about, mics, and you know way more about this than I do, and you could geek out on some of that. But also from Joel's seat, what is it like as he produces others? What is it like from his chair of what works, what doesn't from a host side or editing, production, getting the word out, some of the technical things that I would have no idea about? That I think Joel might be an interesting interview. So if you wanted an invitation connection, I'd be glad to make that for you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. JR, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today to talk about your podcasting journey, share some of your insights around question asking and stretching, all kinds of great stuff we talked about today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much, Tim. And Tim, I do want to just thank you for the questions you asked me. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and the intention and the care and the engagement. So this has been a really engaging conversation, large in part because of your questions. So thank you for that gift.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. I really enjoyed my conversation with JR, talking about Kairos moments, starting the podcast out of a need for an outlet to share what he's learning, and how to ask better questions to build better relationships. You can listen to the Resilient Leaders podcast with JR Briggs with the link in the show notes. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Ministries That Podcast, produced by Sonomorphic. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to follow or subscribe to the podcast and share it with a friend. That's the best way to support this show, and together we'll help more ministries grow and thrive through podcasting. Now come back in 2 weeks to hear my conversation with Jamie and Blake of 3% Co. They're friends and therapists who have counseled hundreds of men in their practices and co-hosts of the podcast 3%. A men's mental health podcast. We're going to talk about how the idea for their ministry was born and why a podcast was their first offering, how they've used Substack alongside the podcast to grow a community, and how having a podcast has enabled them to have conversations with their heroes. Well, until next time, keep encouraging your audience as they follow Jesus.